So, hi everyone, thanks for coming. What I wanted to talk about today was different from what Tom thinks I'm going to talk about. He thinks I'm going to talk about actionable insights. What I'm going to talk about is how to take your analytics from actionable insights into actual impact, because actionable insights, as we'll see in a second, aren't enough. So, quick background. If you look, this is my 3-image history of analytics. When I first got started, the whole thing about analytics, we had just come from a world of reporting, and this is back in the mid-1980s, so I'm aging myself, but the focus of the analytics tools that had just come out was insight. It was not just what happened, but it was about, we want to find out why. The reporting tells us what happened. We need to know why. And so for quite a while, that was what we focused on. Then we started to notice that, well, understanding why it happened is useful, but it's not enough, because if I know that this thing is happening and causing a metric to go down or go up, what do I do about it? I need to know what to do about that why. And so we got into this notion of actionable insights. So it's not just tell me what happened, it's tell me what I can do about it. That's kind of the definition in my mind of actionable insights. And then the teams that I was working with and leading over that period of time were focusing on actionable insights. But then something that should have been obvious to me, but only became apparent after quite a long time was, we don't seem to be having much impact here, or not nearly as much as I think we should. And I realized that actionable insights have no impact unless someone acts on them. So the key is, if you want to have impact, you can't stop with the analysis and here's the actionable insight. You have to, you're not done with when the analysis is done. You're not done actually until someone has acted on it and you've had impact. So now I'm using the word impact. What do I mean by that? Fairly quick definition. It means, for me, something that falls into one of 3 general buckets. Either a metric moved, a product changed, or a process, internal or external, changed. So really what it comes down to is impact means something has to have changed. So the way to figure out if your analytics is having impact is, can you point to something, either measure it or at a minimum just point to it and say, that's different because of the analysis that I did led to that change. And you also have to take to heart something that a lot of analysts I've worked with really resist, is if no one acts on your insight, you have had no impact. And you do the thought experiment, it's no different than if you had not even been at the company. Because if nothing changed from your analysis, then what difference did it make you even being at that company? Nothing changed. So you have to hold yourself accountable for seeing something change. So how do we do that? I'll just go through 3 fairly high-level buckets of how to make sure that your analyses can have impact. Now, I just spent the last slide bashing, stopping at actionable insights. And here I'm saying, well, they need to be actionable. The takeaway is not that you don't need to have actionable insights, it's that actionable insights are not enough. So it is still a prerequisite that they must be actionable. And a couple of things to focus on to help make sure that at least the analysis you're doing and the results, your deliverables, are actionable. And the first thing is, ask yourself, what are people going to do differently when I give them this insight? So if you are doing an analysis of engagement levels by geographical regions, what is someone going to do with that? You have to be able to answer that question. What do you expect them to do when they see that Japan has the highest engagement and Brazil has the lowest? Are they going to go, wow, that's really interesting, and then move on? Nothing's changed in that scenario. What do you expect them to do? And until you can answer that question for yourself, and I'll let you all think about that, like, what do you think they could do with that? I don't know, just if anybody wants to shout out. I know you weren't raising your hand, but I'm going to say you were raising your hand. See, you moved, you caught my eye. Bad move, bad move. So okay, if you were to do this analysis of engagement by region, what could be actionable out of that? And you find that, what did I say? Did I say Germany has the highest and Brazil has the lowest? What do you do with that? Okay, sorry, Olga. Sorry, timed out. Yes. Data error? Check. Okay. Well, yeah, sure. I guess that is something changed. We found an error in our pipeline. But if it's true and it really did happen, I mean, some of the things you would want to do is what is different about usage patterns in Japan? And maybe we're seeing that Japan has found a use case that is highly engaging. And if we dig into that through analytics, we can start introducing that and making people in other regions aware of this use case to see if they adopt it as well. So until you can answer that question for yourself, I think you have to go beyond pipelines. Until you can answer that, don't do the analysis. And then the second part is when you have to provide the actual suggestion as part of your deliverable. And I use this simple framework, and I use it with my teams, the what, so what, now what. What is what happened? That's one part of your deliverable. The so what is why is it important to us? That you also have to include that, the interpretation of the data. And then the third part is now what? And what are you recommending we do? You must provide a recommended action. No one can act on it, or people are unlikely to act on it and connect all the dots themselves. You need to help them do that. All right, the second out of the three items is that the insight itself has to be meaningful. And I mean, I'm using two definitions of meaningful here. First is that it has to be aligned with the company goals or the team goals that you're working with. So it has to be meaningful in the sense that it's something they care about. If the goal is to get people to act on it, that's the only way to get impact, because that's the only way to drive change, is someone has to act. Then if it's aligned with their goals, you are much more likely to get them to act on it than if it's not. So I'm sure we've all been in scenarios where you're at some company and let's say it's e-commerce and an analyst comes to you saying, I've got this great insight about how we can optimize our recommendation engine. And I think we should go do some work on that. And here's my insight and here's my recommendation. But the company has a strategic goal to move outside the US. So internationalization is their focus right now. You have come up with an insight that is very different from what they all want to be focusing on. So good luck getting them to focus on it. Doesn't mean your analysis was poorly done, but if no one's going to act on it, which means it was a waste of time. The second thing is the second definition. These last two parts on this slide are the second definition of meaningful, which means it has to have a meaningful impact on something. The change that we're talking about has to be meaningful versus trivial. So you want to focus on what are these growth levers when you're thinking about what should I analyze? Look at, so what are the main metrics, the old North Star metric, for example. What are the inputs to that? And this tiny little thing here is just some abstract growth model of the North Star metric at the top and then the main inputs, and those break down to other inputs and so on. Then you can put numbers against them and see these different levers, which ones are a lot lower than I think they should be, or we have benchmarks that say that what they should be. Find the ones where you can have impact and there's headroom. And by headroom, I mean, and Tom mentioned this a little bit as well, you have room to move it. It doesn't just mean something that is a low percentage of users are using it, for example, because sometimes it's a power user feature and it's not intended for broad adoption. But when I was working at Google, Tom and I worked together at Google, that was fun. When I was working at Google, working on Google Photos, there was a pretty strong causal relationship that we had identified between backing up your photos to the Google Cloud, because back then, if you didn't do that, it was just on your phone. And if you lost your phone, you lost all your pictures. So there was a strong causal relationship between retention in Google Photos and backing up to the cloud, but only 12% of users were doing that. And this is not a power user feature. It was free. It did it at full resolution. Everyone should be doing that. So that was something where it was low and had a ton of headroom. From 12%, you're never going to get 100%, but we could do a lot more than that. And I remember the first experiment we did to promote it more drove it to 22%. And we were able to continue beyond that. Then the third and final piece here in terms of having a meaningful impact, a meaningful change, is once you have those levers, the ones that you've identified as this is something we can move, focus on the features in the app that move that lever. And generally the way I start is I do first do a quick scan to see what is correlated, but that's just to filter out all the noise. So I'll look for something that initially is correlated, and then if you can do a causal inference analysis on it, do that. And that will tell you, hey, this actually seems to have from historical data, if you have the historical data to do the analysis on, this seems to be something that if we do it, it will causally move that metric. Or if not, then focus on an A/B test, which is still the gold standard to get you whether the insight into whether or not that's causal. And then the final point that I want to make is, okay, so we have that it has to be actionable. We had that it has to be meaningful. Remember, people have to act on it. If we stop there, we haven't accomplished their goal. Everything up to that point is necessary but not sufficient. So 2 things. One of the hardest ones is you have to get resources for this. So, and a bad time to start looking for resources is when your analysis is done. Because if you can't get resources committed to this, then you might want to think about doing a different analysis that you could get resources allocated to. So if you have dedicated resources, great, you're lucky. If not, then I would tend to focus on these kind of 3 tips that are my go-tos. The first one is when they do the planning process up front, tell people these are the growth levers I'm going to be working on. I want to make sure that we've got some resources allocated for that this quarter. Instead of doing it after the fact, get in there early. The second is whenever you have any kind of analysis that led to some kind of positive change in the company, promote the hell out of that internally. Create your own monthly newsletter, whatever it is. You want to show people that this approach works well. And then the last one is come to them with this is the impact it can have. And then the final point is make sure you own the outcome. You are not done until some metric has changed. So you have to be responsible for that. You've got to convince, not just do a good analysis, you've got to convince people to act on it, which is for many people a part of the role that they never learned about in college, but that is the key to having impact. Will you always be successful? No, that's fine. You won't always be successful, but when you are, you'll be able to point to something in the product that you had a meaningful impact on. And for me, that's the reason I got into analytics in the first place. So thank you.